For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Michael, good morning.
Softer inflation figures from the United States, not saying it's over, but they just might be slightly softer than expected, has been enough to lift shares after that day's holiday, particularly as far as China is concerned. Yesterday, South Korea's Kospi is the leader, overnight 2.62% up. The Nikkei up very, very slightly. And mainland China's Shanghai Composite up about a third of a percent. We've often on this programme noted how domestic housing, i.e. the likes of you and me living in houses, might be struggling. But apparently there are green shoots as far as commercial property is concerned. Commercial property and insurance don't face the same sort of pressures as their residential counterparts do. And unlike housing, the commercial property market is beginning to gain momentum again after the lockdowns in China have been lifted. Let's look at the United States and have a look at the markets there. The inflation report, which we're going to get round about our lunchtime time, will probably show it'll be confusing. The headline figure will probably be slightly less, declined by about 0.1%, but core inflation, which I happen to think is slightly more important, which excludes things like energy and other volatile markets, is still continuing to show it excludes energy and food, for example. It's projected to come in at 8%, compared with it probably will be about level. CPI is expected, which is the headline rate, coming in at 8% rather than 8.5% in July. So it's a slightly confusing figure, but the markets are taking it as meaning or thinking this inflation may well be softening very, very slightly. Add to that, though, the sort of layoffs that we're seeing on Wall Street from Goldman Sachs, to name just one. It's showing how the atmosphere of deals is actually cooling a great deal, and there's 47,000 people in New York at the moment who would be looking probably quite anxiously to their HR departments to wonder what's going to happen to them as the days go on. But anyway, deals, the activity in mergers and acquisitions is cooling off quite dramatically. Now, here's an interesting one as far as Twitter is concerned. It looks as though, and again, this quote that we often get about people who are close to the tally process or close to the affair are actually showing that apparently shareholders in Twitter actually are supporting Musk's proposed acquisition of the company. Twitter said what had happened, that they'd given payments to the whistleblower, and apparently Musk's lawyers didn't like that sort of payment, said it was out of course of what ought to be happening as far as the takeover is concerned. But the deadline is today as far as shareholders are concerned, and it looks like the majority of them, or a majority of them, are actually supporting Musk's takeover of the company. Let's turn our attention to the EU, and it looks like a lot of the European Commission bureaucrats are thinking about tax maybe on fossil fuel firms, which have made an enormous amount of money in the face of rising prices being paid for fossil fuels. And of course, I don't need to remind you about red hot energy bills as well. It's likely that if they were to impose a tax, it would try to help those businesses and certainly households that are threatened with higher energy bills over the winter. We shall see. It looks like the UK and the EU have stepped back from direct confrontation over the trade problems with Northern Ireland and so on. It could be that there will be an invisible barrier, and maybe just sort of just occasional checks on lorries going through, in random checks, in the same way, I suppose, that we face when we go through customs at particularly busy times and so on, provided, of course, that the bureaucrats have access to what they describe as real-time data. It looks like the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, will be telling the Treasury to focus on growth, a 2.5% target for growth. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that, in fact, the rate of growth of the UK economy, as we were looking at yesterday, is much slower than actually is required. The Treasury probably is quite good at inputs. It's quite good at seeing where things come from. Apparently, according to its critics, and they have got rid of their top. Kwarteng has already got rid of Tom Scholar, who's one of the top civil servants in the Treasury. The Office for National Statistics as well is saying that the services sector is still the biggest contributor to growth. But Kwasi Kwarteng is certainly seizing Treasury officials, as it were, by the scruff of the neck and saying you got to start thinking about how to promote recovery. And finally, oil prices, once again, a very, very volatile market. It's no big prizes for guessing which way it's going to go every day. But at the moment, the price has actually fallen quite considerably. That's adding to concerns about world global growth and also slowdowns in China. But this could all change by tomorrow. That's the global view this morning.
Right, Michael, how is the UK going to promote recovery when all the indices are down, when there's massive inflation, and when there's no reinvestment in the economy? Because the money that ought to be reinvested, I don't know what the companies are doing with their windfall taxes that this Tory government has said they should keep in their pocket, but you'll tax the UK people and tax generations yet unborn in the future to pay for energy freeze. So how is that going to work? Because a lot of people will say that's hypocrisy on the part of Kwasi Kwarteng. And secondly, I did raise something yesterday. The numbers are not looking good. Disposable income is all-time low. Everything in the UK is all-time low. Then the second question is, how do you stimulate the economy when there's no disposable income? Because it is when people have money, they go out and they spend. But the problem is people are now taking out credit card debts to buy groceries from Lidl.
The theory is that a recovery in the economy would start with tax cuts, which I think we're going to see when the mini budget that is penciled in for the 23rd of September, as I understand it this morning. So we'll see. But I mean, that appears to be where this growth is coming from. In other words, what this government will do will be promote people's freedom to spend, releasing maybe a bit more of to add to their disposable income. You're quite right to notice that it's down at the moment, and shopping habits are changing, and people are going for cheaper prices, and people are loading up their credit cards for food and so on, and all those kind of things are absolutely true. But I think I think what they're getting at, and we'll get more details of this from the budget on the 23rd, but it looks like personal tax cuts, reversal of the national insurance increase, and also a cutting away and encouraging the big offices of state to be looking towards recovery, i.e. taking in, I'm sure, no doubt, making the UK a better place within which to do business for overseas companies. I think all that probably is what they're on about. But I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be a really, really difficult path. Be interesting to see. We're privileged to see it, aren't we?
Okay, a number of things, Michael. The first one, let's start with Barclays. Barclays strategists are saying, look, all this talk about balance of payment crisis facing the UK is overblown, exaggerated, and it's not likely to happen. Do you agree with them? They say it's nothing more than fairy tales. Is there really a balance of payment crisis ahead of the United Kingdom? That's one. The second one has to do with Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is blaming shaky economic conditions. 48% reduction in profit in the second quarter of this year, and on the basis of that, they want to lay off staff. Is that a trend that we're likely to keep witnessing, from many major, institutions like Goldman Sachs? And third, in Sweden, I know you don't like to comment on politics. The Sweden right seems to be gaining grounds, and they may well end up with 50% of the votes to be able to form a coalition government. The counting has not ended yet, but when the counting ends, we'll see how it works. How is that likely to affect anything at all? And finally, I don't know how many you'll be able to comment on Elon Musk. There will be a shareholders meeting of Twitter Incorporated today. And the shareholders are going to take a decision one way or the other. It looks like they are leaning towards Elon Musk can go ahead with the deal. But How does that affect, what is on the table, considering that there is a suit that will come up next month with regard to the Twitter deal involving Elon Musk?
I think the situation with Twitter is very interesting, isn't it? It's clear that, if you believe these reports of people who are, in inverted commas, close to what's going on in the tally of the votes, and yes, you're absolutely right, there's the shareholders meeting today. Of course, the one thing that's missing from the equation is the price. In other words, how much, therefore, will Musk want to pay for Twitter? And will the shareholders still be approving that when he actually names the price? Because he must be now, or at least his lawyers must be coming to the table and thinking, well, we're not going to go for the 44 billion, we'll probably go for something slightly less. Now, again, would the shareholders be approving that kind of takeover? I don't know. So again, it's very, very difficult to understand what's going on there. My thing about Twitter is, how on earth will it make money in the future? I don't know what its business model is. Maybe we'll go for advertising. That seems to be the trend amongst streaming companies right now. The social media people will be doing that. I have no idea. As far as Sweden's concerned, again, I don't really know what the ins and outs of that are. All I would point you to is the fact that it borders Russia, and of course any kind of populist, I don't know whether it's right-wing is populist or not, but let's assume it is, any kind of populist thing against energy and so on, it's going to make life very, very difficult indeed. I think the rest of Europe, as they do, will be looking towards Sweden and the rest of the bordering countries to be educated into which way it turns out. I can be no more specific than that, but I think you're absolutely right. It's a very, very important one to watch. Goldman Sachs, I think it probably is the start of a trend. A lot of the people who work for it do make their money on doing deals, and the deals are drying up. There are fewer IPOs than there were. It isn't to say it isn't all going to start again. And what usually happens is that there is a massive rehiring of people. They're taking presumably a lot of expertise away with them, and they will be required when the market gets brighter. So yes, I think it is the start of a trend. But when that trend reverses, brighter minds than mine will probably be saying, now is the time to reinvest in the companies. That's what I feel.
Balance of payment crisis in the UK, and what the Barclays strategists are saying.
Well, I think what we used always to do was look at there were many of them in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Plenty of balance of payments problems. In other words, we were importing more than we were exporting, and the difference between the two, etc., etc. And the classic thing would be to look at how that actually affects the currency. I think there probably is a problem, although I would imagine that there'll be a bit of consumer destruction as far as higher import prices are concerned as the pound weakens. So it is a problem. Barclays and the rest of them can think what they like. The figures are pretty get-atable, and we can judge it. I don't think it's a major thing to worry about right now. I wouldn't have expected to get any worse. I suspect that imports will start to get expensive and people will be weaned off them, and it takes us right back to the discussion with Rufai, the beginning of all this. It really depends on disposable income at the end of the day, I think.
Thank you very much, Michael Olsen.